The bridge of the UES Defiance hummed with nervous energy as Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen reviewed the tactical display for the 100th time that morning. 3 months had passed since humanity's first contact with an alien species, and the novelty had quickly worn thin when those first visitors turned out to be scouts for something far more dangerous. Marcus ran his weathered fingers over the scar that traced his left temple, a souvenir from the Battle of Kandahar that seemed like a lifetime ago. At 34, he had seen enough conflict to know when someone was sizing him up for a coffin. And the reports coming from the outer colonies painted a very clear picture. The Zephyrian Empire wasn't interested in trade agreements or cultural exchange. Sergeant Chen to the command deck. Admiral Harrison's voice crackled through the intercom. Marcus straightened his dress blues and made his way through corridors lined with Marines who had volunteered for humanity's first deep space defensive mission. Their faces showed the same mixture of excitement and apprehension he felt churning in his own gut. The command deck stretched before him like something from a science fiction movie he'd watched as a kid in Detroit. Holographic displays showed real-time feeds from 17 different star systems, each one representing a human colony that had gone dark in the past 6 weeks. Admiral Harrison stood with his back to the door, studying a tactical projection that made Marcus's blood run cold. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Marcus's voice carried the crisp authority that had earned him respect in 2 wars and a dozen peacekeeping missions. Harrison turned, his weathered face showing every one of his 60 years. "Marcus, I need you to see this." Intelligence just intercepted a transmission from the Proxima colony. The hologram shifted, displaying what appeared to be the remnants of New Geneva, humanity's first successful terraforming project. Where gleaming cities had stood just days before, only smoking craters remained. The transmission was brief, desperate, and cut off mid-sentence as the colonists spoke about ships that blocked out the stars. "Jesus Christ," Marcus whispered. Then caught himself. "Sorry, sir." "Don't be. That's exactly what I said when I saw it." Harrison gestured to the tactical display. 17 colonies, Sergeant, 17. And we have reports of a massive fleet moving toward Earth. Conservative estimates put their numbers at over 3,000 ships. Marcus studied the data streaming across the displays. His mind, trained by years of military analysis, quickly processed the implications. Humanity had exactly 47 ships capable of interstellar combat, and most of those were converted mining vessels with weapons bolted to their hulls. "What's our response plan, Admiral?" Harrison's laugh held no humor. "That's what I wanted to discuss with you. The Joint Chiefs have been in session for 18 hours straight. Half want to surrender immediately and hope for mercy. The other half want to fight and die with honor." He paused, meeting Marcus's gaze directly. "I want to know what a Marine thinks we should do." The question hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. Marcus had served in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and the Congo. He had seen good men die for causes both noble and questionable. But he had never faced a situation where the survival of his entire species hung in the balance. "With respect, sir, what do we know about these Zephyrians? Their tactics, their technology, their motivations?"
Harrison activated another display.
"According to the data our scouts managed to gather before the colonies fell, they're an ancient empire that has controlled this sector of the galaxy for over 10,000 years. Their technology is so advanced it might as well be magic to us. Energy shields that can deflect nuclear weapons faster than light communication that makes our best systems look like smoke signals, and weapons that can crack a planet's crust from orbit."
Marcus nodded slowly, absorbing the information.
"And they want us to surrender unconditionally?" "Complete submission. They're offering to spare Earth's population in exchange for our immediate capitulation and acceptance of their rule. They've done this to hundreds of species across the galaxy." Harrison's voice grew quiet. "Apparently, we're the first species in recorded history to even hesitate when given the ultimatum." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft hum of the ship's systems. Marcus thought about his daughter Sarah, safe in her college dormitory in Boston, probably cramming for finals and complaining about her roommate. He thought about the Marines under his command, young men and women who had signed up to protect their country and found themselves tasked with defending their entire world. "Sir, permission to speak freely?" "Always, Sergeant." Marcus straightened his shoulders. "I've read the history books. I know what happens to people who surrender to tyrants hoping for mercy. Sometimes you get it, most times you don't. But you always lose something that can never be given back. Your dignity, your freedom, your right to determine your own destiny. Harrison nodded. And if we fight, we lose everything anyway. Our entire species could be wiped out. Maybe, Marcus replied, but here's what I learned. In 2 wars, Admiral. The enemy always looks invincible until you bloody their nose. They've been pushing around civilizations for 10,000 years without anyone fighting back. That might make them powerful, but it also makes them overconfident. The Admiral studied the younger man carefully. Are you suggesting we actually engage them in combat? I'm suggesting we remind them what humans do when someone tries to take what's ours.
Marcus gestured to the display showing the destroyed colonies.
They killed innocent people, sir. Families. Children. They came to our homes and murdered our neighbors, then sent us a message saying we should thank them for the privilege of serving them. Harrison was quiet for a long moment. The odds are impossible, Marcus. Even if we somehow managed to defeat their advance fleet, they could send 10 more just like it. Then we make them pay such a price for the first one that they think twice about sending the second. Marcus's voice carried the conviction of a man who had stared death in the face and refused to blink. Sir, I've served with Marines from every background you can imagine. Rich kids from Connecticut, farm boys from Kansas, street kids from Detroit like me. You know what they all have in common? What's that, Sergeant? When someone tells them they can't do something, they take it as a personal challenge. Admiral Harrison walked to the observation deck and stared out at the stars. Earth hung in the distance, a blue marble that held everything humanity had ever known or loved. The Joint Chiefs are meeting again in 2 hours.
They want a military assessment of our options. Marcus joined him at the observation port. What are you going to tell them, sir?
That depends on whether you're willing to help me plan something that will probably get us all killed, but might just save our species.
The 2 men stood in comfortable silence, each lost in his own thoughts.
Marcus thought about the Zephyrian ultimatum that would arrive in less than 24 hours, demanding humanity's immediate and unconditional surrender. He thought about the message he would need to record for his daughter, just in case. Most of all, he thought about the look in the eyes of the Marines who had volunteered for this mission. Not fear, not resignation, but a quiet determination that had carried their predecessors through Belleau Wood, Iwo Jima, and Chosin Reservoir. Sir, what's the estimated arrival time for their main fleet? Harrison consulted his tablet. 72 hours from now, they'll be in Earth's orbital space. Marcus nodded. Then we better get started, because if there's one thing I learned in boot camp at Paris Island, it's that the only easy day was yesterday, and tomorrow we're going to show these aliens why Marines don't surrender.
As if summoned by their conversation, Lieutenant Rodriguez appeared at Marcus's shoulder.
Sergeant, incoming priority transmission from the Zephyrian fleet. They're demanding immediate response from Earth's military leadership. Harrison and Marcus exchanged a look that conveyed volumes. Put it through to the main display, Lieutenant. The hologram shimmered and resolved into an image that would have been impressive if it hadn't been so clearly intended to intimidate. The Zephyrian commander stood nearly 8 feet tall, with scaled skin that shifted from deep purple to silver in the light. 4 arms ending in clawed hands gestured as it spoke, and its voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Primitive species of the 3rd planet, the creature began, its words translated by systems that still seemed like magic to Marcus. I am War Commander Vex High of the Zephyrian 3rd Fleet. Your outlying settlements have been cleansed as a demonstration of our capabilities. You will now surrender unconditionally and accept incorporation into our empire, or your entire species will be eradicated. The alien paused, its large black eyes seeming to stare directly through the transmission. You have 1 solar rotation to broadcast your submission on all frequencies. Any delay will be interpreted as resistance and dealt with accordingly. This is the only warning you will receive. The transmission ended, leaving the command deck in stunned silence. Harrison looked around at his officers, seeing the same mixture of fear and defiance in their faces that he felt in his own heart. Well, gentlemen, the Admiral said quietly, I believe they just made our decision for us. Marcus stepped forward, his voice carrying clearly across the command deck. Sir, request permission to address the crew. Harrison nodded. Go ahead, Sergeant. Marcus activated the ship's communication system, knowing his words would be broadcast not just to the Defiance, but to every human vessel in the fleet. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of a man who had faced impossible odds before and lived to tell about it. This is Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen, speaking to all hands. In 72 hours, we're going to face an enemy that has conquered a galaxy and never known defeat. They've given us a choice. kneel, or die. They expect us to be terrified. They expect us to surrender without a fight. They expect us to beg for mercy. He paused, letting his words sink in. But here's what they don't know about humans. We've spent our entire history doing the impossible. We've climbed the highest mountains, crossed the deadliest oceans, and reached for the stars themselves. Every time someone told us we couldn't do something, we found a way to do it anyway. The command deck had grown completely silent, every person hanging on his words, so when these aliens tell us we have to bow down and accept their rule, there's only one appropriate response. We smile, we load our weapons, and we show them why Earth's children don't surrender. Because the only easy day was yesterday, and tomorrow belongs to us. As Marcus finished speaking, something shifted in the atmosphere of the command deck. Fear remained, but it was no longer the paralyzing terror of the helpless. It had transformed into the focused intensity of warriors preparing for battle. Admiral Harrison stepped forward. All department heads report to the war room in 30 minutes. We have 72 hours to plan the impossible, and I want options on my desk in 60. As the crew dispersed to their duties, Marcus remained at the observation port, staring out at the stars that had suddenly become a battlefield. Somewhere out there, a fleet of alien warships was approaching with the intention of ending human independence forever. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had threatened his home, killed his people, and demanded his surrender. In doing so, they had awakened something that had carried humanity from the caves of Africa to the stars themselves. The absolute refusal to accept defeat when everything worth fighting for was on the line. Marcus smiled as he watched the stars, the same expression that had confused the Zephyrian war commander when the transmission ended. It wasn't the smile of someone who was unafraid. It was the smile of someone who had decided that if he was going to die, he was going to take as many enemies with him as possible. The war for humanity's freedom was about to begin, and Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen intended to make sure the galaxy remembered it. The war room aboard the UES Defiance had been designed for planning conventional naval battles, not for strategizing humanity's survival against an alien empire that had never tasted defeat. Maps of Earth's solar system covered every available wall space, marked with defensive positions, supply routes, and evacuation corridors that everyone knew would prove useless against Zephyrian technology. Marcus Chen sat across from Admiral Harrison, studying intelligence reports that painted an increasingly grim picture. The enemy fleet approaching Earth consisted of vessels so massive that their smallest destroyers outweighed humanity's largest battleships by a factor of 10. Energy readings from their advanced scouts suggested weapons that could boil oceans and shields that could deflect anything in humanity's arsenal. "The Joint Chiefs have made their decision," Harrison announced to the assembled officers. "We fight." A ripple of tension ran through the room. Commander Sarah Walsh, the Defiance's tactical officer, cleared her throat. "Sir, with respect, our computer models show a 0% probability of victory in direct engagement. Their technology advantage is too overwhelming." Marcus looked up from the report he'd been studying. "Commander, what were the odds at Thermopylae?" Walsh blinked in surprise. "I'm sorry, Sergeant. 300 Spartans against an army of 1,000,000 Persians." Mathematically impossible odds, but they held the pass long enough for Greece to mobilize. Sometimes the point isn't to win the battle. It's to make victory so costly that your enemy reconsiders their strategy. Admiral Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "What are you thinking, Marcus?" Marcus stood and walked to the tactical display showing the approaching Zephyrian fleet. "According to our intelligence, they've conquered hundreds of species over 10,000 years. Every single one surrendered when faced with their overwhelming force. They've never had to adapt their tactics to face determined resistance." Lieutenant Rodriguez, the communications specialist, frowned. "But Sergeant, their technology is still centuries ahead of ours. Even if they're tactically inflexible, their raw power advantage is insurmountable." "Is it?" Marcus manipulated the holographic display, highlighting key information from the intelligence reports. "Look at their approach vector. They're not even bothering with advanced scouting patterns or defensive formations. They're flying straight toward Earth in a parade formation, because they expect us to surrender the moment we see them." Commander Walsh studied the tactical projection. "You're right. Their fleet disposition is designed for intimidation, not combat efficiency. But even if we could exploit their overconfidence, our weapons can't penetrate their shielding." Marcus smiled, the same expression that had unnerved the Zephyrian war commander. "Who says we're going to use conventional weapons?" Admiral Harrison leaned forward. "Explain." Marcus activated a new section of the display, showing detailed scans of the alien vessels. Their shields are designed to deflect energy weapons and kinetic projectiles. Incredibly sophisticated technology that can probably stop anything from a nuclear warhead to a railgun slug. But there's one thing they might not have planned for. Which is? Harrison prompted. They expect us to fight like a civilized species. Marcus pulled up data on Earth's asteroid belt and outer system mining operations. Look at their ship designs, sleek, efficient, built for controlled engagements against enemies who follow the same rules of war they do. But we're not a civilized species, Admiral. We're humans. The room fell silent as Marcus continued his explanation. For the past century, we've been mining asteroids and harvesting ice from comets. Our industrial ships can move objects weighing millions of tons. What if we don't try to fight their ships directly? What if we use their expectations against them? Commander Walsh's eyes widened as she began to understand. You're talking about ramming attacks, using our industrial vessels as guided missiles. Not just ramming attacks, Marcus replied. Coordinated mass driver attacks using asteroids as ammunition. If we can accelerate a large enough asteroid to sufficient velocity, even their shields won't matter. Physics is physics, regardless of how advanced your technology is. Harrison studied the tactical implications. The logistics would be insane. We'd have to coordinate mining ships across the entire outer system, calculate intercept courses that account for the enemy fleet's movement, and somehow keep them from detecting our preparations. Marcus nodded. It's impossible, sir, which is exactly why it might work. They've spent 10,000 years fighting enemies who think like they do. Logical, predictable, following established patterns of warfare. They're not prepared for humans who are just crazy enough to try turning the asteroid belt into a weapon. Lieutenant Rodriguez raised his hand tentatively. Sergeant, even if we could pull off something like that, wouldn't it be, I don't know, a war crime or something? Using civilian mining equipment to launch kamikaze attacks? The question hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Marcus thought about the colonists who had died at Proxima, the families who had been vaporized simply for existing in the path of Zephyrian expansion. Rodriguez. They murdered 17 million civilians without warning or provocation. They're demanding the surrender of our entire species under threat of genocide. At what point do we stop worrying about fighting fair and start worrying about survival? Admiral Harrison activated his command tablet. Marcus, I need specifics. How many mining vessels do we have access to? What kind of asteroids can we move? How much time do we need for preparation? Marcus had clearly been thinking about this for some time. The Ceres industrial complex has access to 43 heavy mining ships and over 200 support vessels. Each heavy miner can move asteroids up to 50,000 tons. If we select the right targets, nickel-iron asteroids with high density, and accelerate them to significant fractions of light speed using our most powerful engines, the kinetic impact would be equivalent to nuclear weapons. Commander Walsh ran quick calculations on her tablet. The energy requirements would be enormous. We'd have to drain power from every non-essential system in the outer colonies. Quite. Then we'd drain them, Harrison replied without hesitation. What else do we need? Marcus pulled up another display showing Earth's orbital defenses. We need to make them think we're planning a conventional defense. Deploy our military vessels in standard defensive formations around Earth. Make them believe we're going to meet them ship to ship in Earth orbit. Meanwhile, our civilian mining fleet appears to be evacuating deeper into the outer system. But actually, they're positioning for asteroid attacks, Walsh concluded. How do we coordinate something that complex without the enemy intercepting our communications? Lieutenant Rodriguez spoke up. We don't use standard communications at all. The mining companies have been using low-frequency burst transmissions for decades to coordinate operations across the asteroid belt. It's slow and basic, but it's also completely different from military communication protocols. The aliens might not even recognize it as tactical coordination. Harrison nodded slowly. It's insane. It's improvised. It violates every principle of conventional space warfare. He paused, looking around the room at his officers. It's also the first plan anyone has proposed that doesn't involve immediate surrender or glorious martyrdom. How long do we have to put this together? Marcus checked his chronometer. 68 hours until the Zephyrian fleet reaches Earth orbit. If we start immediately, we can have mining ships in position within 36 hours. That gives us a 32-hour window to accelerate asteroids toward intercept courses. The scale of what they were discussing began to sink in. They were talking about coordinating hundreds of civilian vessels across millions of cubic kilometers of space, turning industrial equipment into weapons of war, and gambling the survival of their species on a strategy that had never been attempted in human history. Commander Walsh voiced what everyone was thinking. Admiral, the margin for error is essentially zero. If even one element of this plan fails, we lose everything. Harrison stood and walked to the observation port, staring out at the stars that would soon be filled with alien warships. Sarah, what's the margin for error if we surrender? The question didn't require an answer. They all knew the history of species that had submitted to Zephyrian rule. Cultural extinction, technological stagnation, and slow absorption into an empire that valued conformity above all else.
All right, Harrison announced.
We're going to need every department working around the clock. Walsh, I want detailed targeting solutions for the enemy fleet's approach vector. Rodriguez, establish secure communications with every mining operation in the outer system. Engineering, begin calculating power requirements and engine modifications for maximum asteroid acceleration. As the officers dispersed to begin the impossible task of organizing humanity's desperate gambit, Marcus remained behind with Admiral Harrison. Marcus, I have to ask, do you really believe this can work? The Marine considered the question carefully. Sir, I believe we have a chance. Maybe not a good chance, but a real one. The Zephyrians have gotten used to easy victories against enemies who fight by their rules. We're about to show them what happens when they face an enemy who makes up new rules as we go. Harrison nodded. And if we fail? Marcus's smile returned, carrying with it the confidence of a man who had faced impossible odds before. Then we fail fighting, sir. And maybe that failure teaches the next human generation something about how to win. Over the next 36 hours, the outer system transformed into a hive of activity unlike anything in human history. Mining ships that had spent decades harvesting ice and ore suddenly found themselves retasked as instruments of war. Civilian crews who had signed on to extract resources from asteroids were now calculating ballistic trajectories for projectiles that would determine the fate of their species. Captain Elena Vasquez commanded the mining vessel New Siberia, one of the most powerful ships in humanity's civilian fleet. She had spent 15 years carving up asteroids in the outer belt, but nothing had prepared her for the orders that came through on the emergency frequency. Rodriguez base to New Siberia. The transmission crackled with the interference common to long-range communications. We need you to position asteroid XK 739 for military operations. Treat this as priority alpha. Elena stared at the tactical data streaming to her ship. Asteroid XK 739 was a nickel iron monster, weighing nearly 100,000 tons, exactly the kind of dense projectile that could punch through alien shields through sheer kinetic force. Rodriguez base, this is Captain Vasquez. Confirming orders to weaponize XK 739. Are we really doing this? The response came back immediately. New Siberia. This is Staff Sergeant Chen speaking from the UES Defiance. Yes, Captain. We're really doing this, and we need it done in 18 hours. Elena had never spoken directly to a military officer before, but something in the Marine's voice made her believe that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. Roger that, Sergeant. New Siberia is moving to intercept. We'll have your asteroid ready for delivery. Across the solar system, similar conversations were taking place as humanity's industrial infrastructure transformed itself into the galaxy's most improvised weapons system. Mining ships maneuvered asteroids into position, cargo haulers redistributed fuel and supplies, and communication technicians coordinated what would either be humanity's greatest victory or its final act of defiance. On the bridge of the UES Defiance, Marcus Chen monitored the preparations with growing confidence. The plan was insane, improvised, and dependent on perfect coordination between military and civilian forces that had never worked together before. In other words, it was exactly the kind of desperate, innovative strategy that humans excelled at when their backs were against the wall. Sergeant, Lieutenant Rodriguez reported, all mining vessels report ready. We have 47 asteroids positioned along the enemy approach vector, each one accelerated to maximum velocity and aimed at precise intercept coordinates. Marcus nodded. And our military vessels? Deployed in standard defensive formation around Earth, sir. To any outside observer, it looks like we're planning a conventional last stand. Perfect. Marcus activated the communication system. Admiral Harrison to the bridge. It's time to send our response to the Zephyrian ultimatum. When Harrison arrived, he found Marcus standing at the tactical display, studying the approaching alien fleet with the calm confidence of a man who had just stacked the deck in humanity's favor. What's our message going to be, Sergeant? Marcus smiled. the same expression that had confused alien commanders and terrified enemy soldiers on a dozen worlds. "Something simple, sir. Something that will make them think we're either incredibly brave or completely insane." Harrison activated the communication system, broadcasting on all frequencies to ensure the Zephyrian fleet would receive their response loud and clear. "This is Admiral Harrison of the United Earth Space Forces, responding to your ultimatum. Humanity's answer is simple. We don't kneel. We don't surrender. And we sure as hell don't bow to bullies who murder civilians and call it diplomacy." The Admiral paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "You want to fight? You've got one. But understand this. You've spent 10,000 years crushing enemies who fought by your rules. Today, you learn what happens when you face humans who don't believe in impossible odds." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in expectant silence. In 62 hours, they would discover whether human ingenuity and desperation could overcome 10 millennia of alien technological superiority. Marcus Chen stood at the observation port, watching the stars and thinking about his daughter Sarah, safe in her college dormitory and completely unaware that her father was about to gamble everything on the longest shot in human history. But as he watched the distant points of light that would soon be filled with alien warships, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since his first firefight in Afghanistan. The absolute certainty that he was exactly where he belonged, doing exactly what needed to be done. The Zephyrians had made their choice when they decided to threaten his home. Now it was time to show them why Marines don't retreat, don't surrender, and don't believe in no-win scenarios. The battle for humanity's freedom was about to begin. The Zephyrian Third Fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system like a plague of metal locusts blotting out the stars. War Commander Vexhai stood on the bridge of his flagship, Dominion of Worlds, watching the primitive human vessels arrange themselves in what appeared to be a pathetically inadequate defensive formation around their home planet. Vexhai's forearms moved in a gesture of dismissive amusement as he studied the tactical display. In 10,000 years of conquest, he had seen this same pattern repeated across 1,000 worlds, a desperate last stand by inferior beings who refused to accept the inevitable reality of Zephyrian supremacy. "Sub-Commander." Vexhai's voice resonated with the authority of someone who had never known defeat. "Deploy the fleet in standard intimidation formation. These primitives need to see the full scope of their hopelessness before we begin the cleansing." Sub-Commander Korthresh, a veteran of 300 conquest campaigns, activated the tactical display showing the human fleet arrangement. "War Commander, their defensive positioning is unusual. They have placed their most powerful vessels directly between our approach vector and their homeworld, but their support ships appear to be scattered throughout the outer system." Vexhai examined the human positions with the detached interest of a scientist studying insects. "Evacuation protocols, most likely. The cowards are abandoning their military vessels while their civilian fleet flees deeper into space. Unquote, certain." He paused, considering. Still, their willingness to offer even token resistance is refreshing. It has been cycles since we faced enemies with any spirit left in them. The massive Zephyrian fleet arranged itself in a formation designed to maximize psychological impact. 3,000 ships spreading across space in perfect geometric patterns that demonstrated absolute tactical superiority. Each vessel hummed with energy shields that could deflect nuclear weapons and weapons systems capable of cracking planetary crusts. On the bridge of the UES Defiance, Marcus Chen watched the alien deployment with the calculating eye of a warrior who had learned to find opportunity in the enemy's arrogance. The Zephyrian formation was mathematically perfect, aesthetically impressive, and tactically predictable. Exactly what he had hoped for. "Admiral," Marcus reported, "enemy fleet is deploying in textbook intimidation formation. They're positioning for maximum visual impact rather than combat efficiency." Harrison nodded grimly. "How long until our asteroids reach intercept position?" Commander Walsh consulted her tactical display. 16 minutes until the first wave arrives. The Zephyrians are maintaining course and speed exactly as projected. They have no idea what's coming." Marcus activated the communication system connected to the mining fleet scattered throughout the outer system. "This is Defiance control to all mining vessels. Begin final approach sequences. Remember, timing is everything. We get one chance at this." Throughout the asteroid belt, humanity's improvised weapons system began its final approach. Mining ships that had spent decades extracting resources from dead rocks were now guiding those same rocks toward collision courses with alien warships. Captain Elena Vasquez gripped her control console as the New Siberia's massive engines pushed asteroid XK-739 toward its destiny. "Rodriguez Base, this is New Siberia. My rock is on final approach. Estimated time to target, 14 minutes. Similar reports flooded in from across the solar system as 47 mining vessels completed the most important delivery run in human history. Each asteroid had been carefully selected for maximum density and impact potential, accelerated to velocities that would make them unstoppable once they reached their targets. War Commander Vexhai noticed the first anomaly when his sensors detected massive kinetic signatures approaching from unexpected vectors. Subcommander, what are those objects moving toward our fleet? Court Thresh manipulated the tactical display, highlighting the incoming projectiles. They appear to be asteroids, War Commander. Natural space debris moving at significant velocity. Vexai's scaled features shifted in an expression of contempt. The primitives are throwing rocks at us? How quaint. Adjust course to avoid collision with the larger objects. No need to test our shields against mere chunks of stone. But as the Zephyrian fleet began minor course corrections to avoid the incoming asteroids, the true scope of humanity's plan became apparent. The rocks weren't random debris. They were precisely guided projectiles converging on the alien formation from multiple vectors simultaneously. War Commander. Court Thresh's voice carried a note of alarm. These asteroids are on calculated intercept courses. This is a coordinated attack. For the first time in his long military career, Vexai felt something approaching uncertainty. The primitive humans had weaponized their own solar system, turning industrial mining equipment into a delivery system for kinetic bombardment on a scale he had never encountered. All ships implement evasive maneuvers, Vexai commanded. These creatures are more cunning than anticipated. But the Zephyrian fleet, arranged in its perfect intimidation formation, was poorly positioned for rapid maneuvers. Ships that had been positioned for maximum psychological impact found themselves unable to avoid the incoming barrage of accelerated asteroids. The first impact occurred when asteroid XK-739, guided by Captain Vasquez's expert piloting, struck the Zephyrian destroyer Wrath of Kings at a relative velocity that converted 100,000 tons of nickel iron into pure kinetic energy. The alien vessel's shields, designed to deflect energy weapons and conventional projectiles, proved useless against a mountain-sized chunk of metal moving at significant fractions of light speed. The destroyer simply ceased to exist, vaporized by the impact that released energy equivalent to a thermonuclear weapon. The shockwave from the explosion rippled through the Zephyrian formation, causing nearby ships to adjust their positions and creating gaps in their previously perfect tactical arrangement. On the bridge of the Defiance, Marcus Chen watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction as humanity's improvised weapon system found its targets. First impact confirmed. Enemy destroyer eliminated. Remaining asteroids on final approach. Over the next 3 minutes, the space around Earth's solar system transformed into a cosmic shooting gallery as 46 additional asteroids found their marks. Zephyrian ships, caught off guard by an attack unlike anything in their military experience, struggled to adapt their tactics to face an enemy that had just rewritten the rules of space warfare. War Commander Vexhai watched in stunned silence as his third fleet, which had conquered star systems without losing a single vessel, suffered casualties from primitives throwing rocks. The tactical displays showed 12 ships destroyed outright and 17 more damaged by impacts that their advanced technology had been unable to prevent. Subcommander, Vexhai's voice carried a cold fury that his crew had never heard before. These humans have made a fatal mistake. They have drawn our attention. Court Thresh activated the weapon systems across the remaining Zephyrian fleet. War Commander, shall we begin bombardment of their homeworld? No. Vexhai's claws extended in a gesture of predatory anticipation. First, we destroy every ship in their pathetic fleet. I want them to watch helplessly as we dismantle their defenses piece by piece. Then we will demonstrate why the Zephyrian Empire has never been successfully challenged. The alien fleet reformed into combat formation, their weapons charging with energy that could boil oceans. But as they moved to engage the human defensive fleet, Marcus Chen smiled, the same expression that had confused enemy commanders on 3 continents and now in deep space. Admiral, Marcus reported, enemy fleet is moving to engage our defensive positions. They're angry, and angry opponents make mistakes. Harrison activated the fleet-wide communication system. All ships, implement Operation Broken Arrow. Let's show these aliens what humans do when someone threatens our home. The human defensive fleet, which had appeared to be waiting passively for destruction, suddenly burst into coordinated action. Ships that had seemed vulnerable and outnumbered revealed hidden capabilities that intelligence reports had never mentioned. The converted mining vessels and cargo haulers weren't just improvised warships, they were floating bombs. Captain James Morrison commanded the converted cargo hauler Pittsburgh Steel, which had been retrofitted with every nuclear weapon that could be crammed into its cargo holds. As the Zephyrian cruiser Eternal Dominion moved within range, Morrison activated his ship's final protocol. "This is Pittsburgh Steel to all ships. It's been an honor serving with you. Tell my family I love them." The Pittsburgh Steel accelerated directly toward the alien cruiser, its hull packed with enough nuclear warheads to level a continent. The Zephyrian shields, already weakened by asteroid impacts, proved insufficient against a suicide attack that delivered megatons of explosive force directly to the enemy hull. The resulting explosion eliminated both the Pittsburgh Steel and the Eternal Dominion, but it also demonstrated to the Zephyrian fleet that they were facing an enemy unlike any they had encountered before, humans who would rather die fighting than live on their knees. Across the battlefield, similar sacrifices played out as humanity's defensive fleet revealed the true depth of human desperation and ingenuity. Ships that appeared to be conventional warships were actually mobile weapons platforms designed for single-use maximum impact scenarios. War Commander Vexhai watched his casualties mount with growing disbelief. These primitives weren't just fighting, they were winning. Not through superior technology or tactical brilliance, but through sheer bloody-minded refusal to accept defeat. "Sub-Commander, what is our casualty report?" Korthresh consulted the tactical display with evident shock. "War Commander, we have lost 47 vessels destroyed and 83 damaged. Our combat effectiveness has been reduced by approximately 30%. The number hung in the air like an accusation. In 10,000 years of conquest, the Zephyrian Third Fleet had never sustained casualties approaching these levels. These humans, with their improvised weapons and suicide attacks, had achieved what entire star empires had failed to accomplish." "War Commander," the communications officer reported, "we are receiving a transmission from the human flagship." Vex-High activated the communication system, his fury barely contained. The image that appeared on his display showed a human in military uniform standing calmly on what appeared to be a primitive spacecraft bridge. The creature's demeanor showed no fear, no desperation, only the quiet confidence of a warrior who had just proved his point. "This is Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen of the United Earth Space Forces," the human began. "I believe you wanted to discuss terms of surrender." Vexhi's forearms trembled with rage. "You dare mock the Zephyrian Empire? Your pitiful attacks have merely delayed the inevitable. We will crush your remaining ships and reduce your homeworld to ash." Marcus's smile never wavered. "With respect, War Commander, you've just lost nearly 50 ships to a species that achieved spaceflight less than a century ago. We used mining equipment and construction materials to hand you the worst defeat your empire has suffered in 10,000 years. How do you think this is going to look in your official reports?" The question struck Vex-High like a physical blow. The political implications of sustained casualties against primitive humans would ripple through the Zephyrian hierarchy for cycles. Failure was not tolerated in the Empire, and commanders who suffered defeats, regardless of circumstances, faced consequences that made death seem merciful. "What are you proposing, human?" Marcus leaned forward slightly, his expression becoming deadly serious. "Simple. You withdraw your fleet beyond our solar system and never return. In exchange, we don't transmit detailed recordings of this battle to every species in the galaxy showing how a bunch of humans with mining ships managed to bloody the nose of the mighty Zephyrian Third Fleet." The audacity of the proposal left Vexhai speechless. These primitives weren't just demanding their freedom. They were threatening to humiliate the Empire across the galaxy by broadcasting evidence of Zephyrian vulnerability. "And if we refuse your generous offer?" Marcus's smile became predatory. "Then we continue this fight, and you discover what humans are really capable of. When we stop holding back. You've seen our mining ships and cargo haulers. You haven't seen our actual military technology yet." The statement was a complete bluff. Humanity had revealed virtually everything in their arsenal during the initial attack. But Marcus delivered it with such conviction that even Vexhai wondered what other surprises these impossible creatures might have prepared. Sub-Commander Korthresh activated a private communication channel. "War Commander, our strategic analysis suggests the humans are operating beyond their actual capabilities. This may be an optimal time to negotiate temporary withdrawal and request reinforcements." Vexhai considered his options with the calculation of a military professional who had survived 3 centuries of warfare. Pride demanded that he crush these insolent primitives, but practical politics suggested that preserving what remained of his fleet might be more important than achieving immediate victory. "Human," Vexhai's voice carried the weight of reluctant respect, "you have proven more resilient than anticipated. The Zephyrian Empire acknowledges your species' determination. Marcus nodded. Does that mean you're accepting our terms? The war commander was silent for a long moment, weighing 10,000 years of imperial pride against the political reality of explaining significant casualties to his superiors. The Third Fleet will withdraw beyond your system's boundaries. But understand this, human. You have merely postponed your species' inevitable incorporation into our empire. We will return with greater numbers and more comprehensive strategies. Maybe, Marcus replied, but today you're leaving. And today is what matters. As the Zephyrian fleet began its withdrawal from Earth's solar system, Marcus Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance and watched humanity's first interstellar military victory unfold on the tactical displays. They had lost 23 ships and over 4,000 brave men and women, but they had also achieved something that no other species in recorded galactic history had accomplished. They had made the Zephyrian Empire retreat. Admiral Harrison joined Marcus at the observation port. Think they'll keep their word? Marcus considered the question. For now. But they'll be back, sir. Probably with a fleet 10 times larger and a strategy designed specifically to counter our tactics. Harrison nodded. Then we better use the time we've bought to prepare for round 2. As Earth celebrated humanity's first victory in interstellar warfare, Marcus Chen began planning for the next battle, in what he knew would be a long and costly war. The Zephyrians had learned that humans didn't surrender easily, but they had also learned enough about human tactics to develop countermeasures. The next time they met, it would be a very different fight. But for now, humanity had proven something important to itself and to the galaxy. When someone threatened their freedom, humans didn't kneel. They smiled, they fought, and they found a way to win. 6 months after humanity's impossible victory over the Zephyrian Third Fleet, the celebration had given way to the sobering reality of preparing for inevitable retaliation. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen stood in what had once been the recreation deck of the UES Defiance, now converted into a strategic planning center, where the brightest minds from Earth's military, scientific, and industrial communities worked around the clock to prepare for the next phase of humanity's war for survival. The cost of their victory had been measured in more than ships and lives. The asteroid bombardment had consumed nearly 40% of humanity's outer system mining capacity. The suicide attacks had eliminated irreplaceable industrial vessels, and the improvised weapon systems had pushed Earth's manufacturing infrastructure to its breaking point. They had won the battle, but the economic aftermath threatened to cripple their ability to fight the war. Marcus reviewed intelligence reports that painted an increasingly troubling picture of Zephyrian response across the galaxy. Word of the Third Fleet's defeat had spread through Imperial communication networks, triggering reactions that ranged from disbelief to outright rebellion among subject species who had never imagined successful resistance was possible. Admiral Harrison approached Marcus's workstation, his face showing the strain of 6 months spent preparing for an enemy that could arrive at any moment with overwhelming force. Marcus, we just received confirmation from our deep space monitoring stations. Long-range sensors are detecting massive fleet movements in the Zephyrian core worlds. Marcus looked up from the tactical projections he'd been studying. How massive, sir? Conservative estimates suggest they're assembling a force of over 10,000 ships, multiple battle groups from different sectors of their empire, all converging on staging areas approximately 50 light-years from Earth. Harrison's voice carried the weight of someone who had seen the sensor data and understood its implications. The scale of the approaching retaliation was staggering. Where humanity had faced 3,000 ships in their first engagement, they were now looking at more than triple that number, commanded by leaders who had studied every detail of their previous defeat and developed countermeasures specifically designed to neutralize human tactics. Commander Walsh joined their conversation, carrying a data tablet loaded with the latest strategic assessments. Sir, our computer models are unanimous. Even with the improvements we've made to our defensive systems, the odds of successfully defending Earth against a fleet that size are essentially zero. Marcus studied the tactical projections, his mind working through possibilities and alternatives, with the systematic approach that had kept him alive through 2 wars and countless smaller conflicts. What about evacuation protocols? How many people can we move to the outer colonies? Harrison activated a holographic display showing Earth's population centers. Our most optimistic scenarios allow for evacuating maybe 10% of Earth's population to established colonies. The logistics of moving 8 billion people across interstellar distances with our current transport capacity is simply impossible. The numbers represented more than statistics. They represented families, friends, entire cultures that would be lost if humanity's second encounter with the Zephyrian Empire ended in defeat. Marcus thought about his daughter Sarah, now working as a xenobiologist in the research team studying captured Zephyrian technology. and about the millions of other young people who deserved a chance to live their lives free from alien domination. Lieutenant Rodriguez approached their group, his expression carrying the urgency of someone who had just received critical intelligence. Sirs, we're receiving priority transmissions from across the galaxy. You need to see this. The communication system activated, displaying a series of messages from species that had remained silent since first contact with humanity. The first transmission came from the Kepler Collective, a federation of aquatic beings from the Vega system who had been absorbed into the Zephyrian Empire nearly a millennium ago. Greetings to the warriors of Earth, the translated message began. We are the Kepler Collective, and we have watched your battle against our mutual oppressors with great interest. For 1,000 years we have served the Empire because we believed resistance was impossible. You have shown us that impossible is merely another word for difficult. Similar messages followed from dozens of species scattered across Zephyrian space. The crystalline hierarchies of Arcturus, the nomadic fleets of the Perseus Arm, the underground networks of Tau Ceti. Each message carried the same theme. Humanity's victory had ignited something that the Zephyrian Empire had worked for millennia to suppress. Hope. Marcus listened to the transmissions with growing understanding. Admiral, they're not just offering moral support. They're offering intelligence, supply lines, and potentially military cooperation. Harrison nodded slowly. The Zephyrians may have won every battle for 10,000 years, but they've also created enemies across half the galaxy. Our victory has shown those enemies that the Empire can be hurt. Play big. Commander Walsh manipulated the holographic display to show the full scope of Zephyrian space. If even a fraction of these species are willing to provide active support, we could be looking at the beginnings of a galactic rebellion. The implications were staggering. Humanity's desperate gambit to defend their homeworld had accidentally triggered the largest threat to Zephyrian power in recorded history. Subject species, who had endured centuries of oppression, were beginning to believe that liberation might be possible. But inspiration alone wouldn't stop 10,000 alien warships from reducing Earth to radioactive ash. Marcus turned his attention to the tactical challenges that remained unsolved despite 6 months of intensive preparation. Sir, we need to discuss the elephant in the room. Even with alien allies providing intelligence and support, we can't fight the kind of battle we fought 6 months ago. The Zephyrians will be prepared for asteroid bombardments, suicide attacks, and improvised weapons. We need a fundamentally different strategy. Harrison activated a secure communication channel. That's what I wanted to discuss with you. We've been developing what Command is calling the Exodus Protocol. The holographic display shifted to show detailed schematics of a project that represented humanity's most ambitious engineering undertaking since the first interstellar colonies. Massive construction ships were converting asteroids into mobile habitats, while industrial facilities worked around the clock to build a fleet of vessels designed not for warfare, but for survival. We can't save Earth, Harrison explained quietly, but we might be able to save humanity. The Exodus Protocol calls for evacuating our most essential personnel, technology, and cultural resources to mobile colonies that can survive in deep space indefinitely. Marcus studied the schematics with the eye of someone who understood both the genius and the tragedy of the plan. We're talking about abandoning our homeworld. We're talking about ensuring our species survives to fight another day, Harrison corrected. The Zephyrians want to break our spirit by destroying Earth. But if humanity continues to exist somewhere in the galaxy, if we continue to inspire rebellion among their subject species, then Earth becomes a symbol rather than a target. The strategy represented a fundamental shift in human thinking about the war. Instead of fighting to defend fixed positions, they would become a nomadic species, carrying their civilization among the stars and supporting resistance movements across Zephyrian space. Commander Walsh raised the obvious question. Admiral, what about the people who can't be evacuated? The billions of civilians who will be left behind when the Zephyrian fleet arrives? The question hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Everyone in the room understood that the Exodus Protocol represented salvation for some and abandonment for others. The moral weight of choosing who lived and who died pressed down on them like the gravity of a collapsing star. Marcus thought about his daughter Sarah, who would certainly be among the evacuees due to her scientific expertise. He thought about his neighbors in Detroit, the teachers who had educated him, the Marines who had served under his command. The protocol would save the future of humanity while sacrificing its present. There's another option, Marcus said quietly. Something we haven't considered because it's even more insane than throwing asteroids at alien battleships. Harrison looked at him with the expression of someone who had learned to take Marcus Chen's insane ideas very seriously. What are you thinking? Marcus manipulated the holographic display to show the Zephyrian fleet positions and Earth's defensive arrangements.
What if we don't try to fight them at all? What if we let them have Earth?
The suggestion was met with stunned silence. Walsh was the first to respond. Sergeant, you're talking about surrender. After everything we've accomplished, you want to just give up? Not surrender, Marcus clarified. Misdirection. The Zephyrians are coming here expecting the Battle of the Millennium, the final confrontation that will either establish their dominance or prove their vulnerability. What if neither happens? Admiral Harrison leaned forward, beginning to understand. You're suggesting we let them occupy an empty planet? Exactly. We evacuate everyone we can through the Exodus Protocol. But we make it look like a panicked retreat rather than an organized withdrawal. We leave behind enough evidence of our civilization to make Earth appear valuable, but we remove everything that actually matters: people, technology, cultural resources. The concept was audacious in its simplicity. Instead of fighting for Earth, humanity would surrender an empty shell while preserving everything that made them human among the stars. Commander Walsh ran tactical calculations on her tablet. The logistics would be incredible. We'd have to coordinate the evacuation of entire cities while maintaining the illusion that we're still preparing to defend them. And we'd have to do it without the Zephyrians detecting the true scope of our activities. Marcus nodded. But consider the advantages. The Zephyrians expect us to fight desperately for our homeworld. If we simply abandon it, we subvert their entire strategic framework. They've prepared to face human resistance, not human absence. Harrison studied the implications, and while they're occupying an empty planet, trying to understand what happened to its population, we're establishing hidden bases throughout the galaxy and coordinating rebellion among their subject species. The strategy represented a fundamental rejection of traditional military thinking. Instead of meeting strength with strength, humanity would use their enemies' expectations against them. The Zephyrians wanted a glorious victory that would demonstrate their invincibility. Instead, they would find an empty world that raised more questions than it answered. Lieutenant Rodriguez raised a practical concern. Sirs, how do we coordinate something this complex without the enemy intercepting our communications? The scale of evacuation we're discussing would require constant communication between thousands of ships and facilities. Marcus smiled, the same expression that had confused enemies across 3 star systems. The same way we coordinated the asteroid bombardment, using systems so primitive that advanced civilizations don't recognize them as tactical communications. Over the following weeks, humanity began the most ambitious deception operation in their history. While conventional military preparations continued openly, massive civilian evacuations proceeded under cover of routine industrial activities. Mining ships that appeared to be harvesting asteroids were actually establishing hidden supply bases. Transport vessels that seemed to be conducting normal cargo runs were relocating entire populations to concealed colonies. Captain Elena Vasquez, who had guided humanity's first successful attack against Zephyrian forces, now found herself commanding one of dozens of evacuation vessels carrying refugees to temporary shelter in the outer system. Her cargo hold, which had once held mining equipment, now contained families with children who clutched toys and asked when they could go home. Rodriguez based to New Siberia. The familiar voice of Lieutenant Rodriguez crackled over the communication system. "How's your passenger manifest looking, Captain?" Elena checked her status display. 2,000 civilians secure and ready for transport. Mix of essential personnel and their families, plus random selections from major population centers. We're maintaining the illusion of panic evacuations while actually following carefully planned selection criteria. The conversation reflected the dual nature of humanity's evacuation. To outside observers, it appeared to be the desperate flight of a species facing inevitable destruction. In reality, it was a carefully orchestrated preservation of human civilization's most important elements. On the bridge of the UES Defiance, Marcus Chen monitored the progress of Operation Exodus with mixed emotions. They were saving millions of lives and preserving humanity's future among the stars, but they were also abandoning the world that had given birth to their species. Admiral Harrison joined him at the observation port. "Second thoughts, Marcus?" Marcus considered the question while watching Earth turn slowly beneath them. "No, sir. This is the right choice, but it's still the hardest thing I've ever had to do." Harrison nodded. "In 3 weeks, the Zephyrian fleet will arrive to find a planet with empty cities, abandoned military bases, and no population to conquest. They'll spend months trying to understand what happened while we establish ourselves as a galactic resistance movement. And when they finally figure out that we played them for fools," Marcus added, "they'll discover that humanity isn't tied to any single world. We've become something they've never faced before. A nomadic species that can't be conquered because we have no fixed positions to attack. The transformation of humanity from a planet-bound species to galactic nomads represented more than military strategy. It was evolution forced by necessity. The Zephyrians had wanted to break human spirit by destroying their homeworld, but instead they had freed humanity from the limitations of planetary thinking. As the evacuation continued and the Zephyrian fleet drew closer, Marcus Chen prepared for the next phase of a war that would be fought not for territory, but for the right of all species to determine their own destiny. The Marines who had refused to kneel were about to become something new, freedom fighters carrying the fire of rebellion to every corner of the galaxy. The Zephyrians had made their choice when they decided that conquest was preferable to coexistence. Now they would learn that some species couldn't be conquered, couldn't be broken, and couldn't be stopped by conventional force. Humanity was about to become the galaxy's most dangerous enemy, one that fought not from fixed positions, but from everywhere at once. 2 years after the Great Evacuation, as historians would later call it, Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen stood on the observation deck of the mobile command station New Horizon, watching the stars of the Andromeda approach where humanity had established its most ambitious hidden base. What had begun as a desperate flight from Earth had evolved into something the Zephyrian Empire had never faced in 10,000 years of conquest, a galaxy-wide resistance movement that operated from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. The transformation of human civilization had been as complete as it was necessary. Cities that had once housed millions now existed as self-contained habitats drifting through the void between stars. Industrial complexes had become mobile manufacturing platforms that could appear in any system, produce whatever the resistance needed, and vanish before enemy forces arrived. Most importantly, humanity had learned to think not as the defenders of a single world, but as liberators of an entire galaxy. Marcus reviewed intelligence reports that would have seemed like science fiction 2 years earlier. The Kepler Collective had successfully sabotaged 3 major Zephyrian supply depots, using technical specifications provided by human engineers who had studied captured alien technology. The crystalline hierarchies of Arcturus had declared open rebellion and were holding their home system against Imperial forces with weapons designed in human research facilities. The underground networks of Tau Ceti had begun broadcasting humanity's story across Zephyrian space, inspiring resistance movements on 1,000 worlds. Admiral Harrison approached Marcus's observation post, his appearance showing the strain of 2 years spent coordinating the most complex military operation in galactic history. Where conventional warfare focused on controlling territory, humanity's strategy required managing relationships with dozens of alien species, maintaining secure supply lines across interstellar distances, and coordinating attacks that struck simultaneously across multiple star systems. Marcus, we just received confirmation from the Zeta Reticuli cell. Their attack on the Imperial garrison was completely successful. No casualties among our allies, and they've liberated over 2 million Zephyrian subjects. Harrison activated a holographic display showing the current status of rebellion across known space. Each liberated world became a recruitment center for the growing resistance, providing new volunteers, resources, and intelligence about Zephyrian operations. More importantly, each victory proved to other subject species that the Empire could be defeated by organized resistance using human-designed tactics. What's the status of Operation Payback, sir? Harrison's expression grew serious. That's what I wanted to discuss with you. Our deep space reconnaissance has confirmed that the Zephyrian High Command has finally traced our operations back to their source. They know humanity is coordinating the galactic rebellion. The development had been inevitable. Human fingerprints were evident in every successful resistance operation. The tactical innovations, the technological adaptations, the strategic coordination that had turned scattered rebellions into a unified galactic war. The Zephyrians had spent 2 years trying to understand how their stable empire had suddenly exploded into chaos, and they had finally identified the catalyst. Are they moving against our bases? Marcus asked. Worse. They're implementing what intelligence calls the final protocol. Complete extermination of humanity across the galaxy, followed by systematic suppression of all subject species. They've decided that coexistence with human-influenced civilizations is impossible. The scope of Zephyrian retaliation was staggering. Rather than attempting to restore control through conventional conquest, they were planning the systematic genocide of every species that had shown signs of human influence. It represented the largest military operation in galactic history, designed to eliminate not just humanity, but the very concept of successful resistance. Commander Walsh joined their conversation, carrying intelligence reports that painted an increasingly urgent picture. Sirs, we've detected massive fleet movements from the Zephyrian core worlds. Conservative estimates suggest they're deploying over 50,000 ships across multiple sectors. Their stated objective is the complete elimination of what they're calling the human contagion. Marcus absorbed the implications of facing an enemy force more than 15 times larger than anything humanity had previously encountered. But instead of the despair that such overwhelming odds should have inspired, he felt something that had sustained him through a dozen impossible battles, the absolute certainty that his enemy had just made a critical mistake. Admiral, they're doing exactly what we hoped they would do. Harrison looked at him with the expression of someone who had learned to trust Marcus Chen's tactical instincts even when they seemed to defy logic. Explain. Marcus manipulated the holographic display to show the distribution of Zephyrian forces across the galaxy. Look at their deployment pattern. They're spreading their fleet across hundreds of star systems, trying to suppress rebellions everywhere simultaneously. They've divided their forces to deal with a threat they still don't understand. The tactical analysis was correct. The Zephyrian response to galactic rebellion was based on the assumption that they were facing conventional resistance movements tied to specific territories. They were deploying forces to occupy and control planets, not realizing that humanity's resistance operated independently of fixed positions. Commander Walsh began to understand. They're fighting the war they know how to fight, not the war we're actually fighting. Exactly, Marcus confirmed. They're trying to control territory against an enemy that doesn't need territory. They're deploying overwhelming force against targets that don't exist. And most importantly, they're spreading their fleet so thin that we can achieve local superiority anywhere we choose to engage them. Admiral Harrison activated secure communications to resistance cells across the galaxy. Marcus, what you're describing sounds like the setup for Operation Prometheus. Operation Prometheus represented humanity's most ambitious strategic plan, a coordinated galactic assault designed to strike at the heart of Zephyrian power while their forces were dispersed across the galaxy fighting rebellions. Instead of defending against the enemy's overwhelming numerical superiority, humanity would turn that superiority into a weakness by forcing the Zephyrians to spread their forces across impossible distances. Sir, if we're implementing Prometheus, we need to contact every resistance cell simultaneously. This isn't something we can coordinate using standard communication protocols. Harrison smiled grimly. That's what the Galactic Network is for. Over the past 2 years, humanity had constructed something unprecedented in galactic history, a communication system that connected resistance movements across thousands of light years using quantum entanglement principles reverse-engineered from captured Zephyrian technology. The network allowed instantaneous coordination between human forces and their alien allies, creating a command structure that operated faster than any conventional military organization. Marcus activated his command interface, connecting to resistance cells on worlds whose names he couldn't pronounce, coordinated by species he had never met, united by a common determination to break the chains of Zephyrian oppression. All network nodes, this is Command Actual. Operation Prometheus is authorized. Repeat, Prometheus is authorized. Execute your assigned objectives on my mark. The response came back immediately from across the galaxy, hundreds of acknowledgements in dozens of languages, all confirming readiness to implement humanity's plan for ending 10,000 years of imperial domination. The scope of what they were attempting was staggering. Simultaneous attacks on critical infrastructure across Zephyrian space, coordinated liberation of prison worlds holding political dissidents, targeted strikes on communication networks that would blind Imperial command to developing situations, and most ambitious of all, a direct assault on the Zephyrian homeworld itself. Captain Elena Vasquez, now commanding a strike force of converted mining vessels and alien allies, led the attack on the Imperial shipyards at Proxima Dominion. Her fleet included Kepler Collective submarines adapted for space warfare, crystalline hierarchy energy projectors, and human-designed kinetic bombardment systems that turned industrial asteroids into precision weapons. Rodriguez based to Strike Force Alpha. Elena reported as her ships moved into position. Target acquired. Imperial shipyards are operating at full capacity with minimal defensive coverage. Beginning attack run. Similar reports flooded in from across the galaxy as humanity's resistance network implemented the largest coordinated military operation in recorded history. The Tau Ceti Underground was liberating prison worlds. And the Vegan Liberation Front was destroying communication relays. The Perseus Sector Alliance was capturing supply convoys. But the crown jewel of Operation Prometheus was the direct assault on Zephyr Prime, the homeworld that had served as the capital of galactic oppression for 10 millennia. Leading that attack was Marcus Chen himself, commanding a strike force that included volunteers from every species that had suffered under Imperial rule. The UES Defiance, extensively modified with captured alien technology and crewed by the most experienced resistance fighters in the galaxy, dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Zephyr system. What Marcus saw there made him understand why the Zephyrian Empire had dominated the galaxy for so long.
Zephyr Prime was more than a planet. It was a fortress world protected by defensive installations that could destroy entire fleets. Orbital platforms bristled with weapons that had never been tested in combat because no enemy had ever penetrated this far into Imperial space.
Energy barriers surrounded the planet like layers of an onion, each one capable of deflecting attacks that could shatter moons. "Jesus Christ!" whispered Lieutenant Rodriguez, now serving as Marcus's tactical officer.
How are we supposed to get through that?
Marcus studied the defensive systems with the calculating eye of someone who had made a career of finding ways to accomplish the impossible.
The same way we always do, Rodriguez. We don't attack what they're prepared to defend. The approach that had served humanity throughout the Resistance War was based on attacking the enemy's assumptions rather than their positions.
The Zephyrian defenses were designed to repel massive frontal assaults by conventional fleets. They weren't prepared for what Marcus had in mind.
All ships implement Protocol 7. We're not going through their defenses, we're going under them. Protocol 7 represented humanity's most audacious tactical innovation, using modified mining equipment to tunnel through planetary crust and strike at targets from below. The technique had been developed during the liberation of the Kepler worlds and refined through dozens of successful operations against seemingly impregnable fortresses.
Marcus's strike force included specialized boring ships that could tunnel through solid rock faster than most vessels could fly through space. Instead of attacking Zephyr Prime's orbital defenses, they would burrow directly through the planet's crust and emerge in the heart of the Imperial capital. The operation required precise coordination and perfect timing. While the boring ships carved their way toward the planet's surface, the rest of the strike force engaged the orbital defenses in a diversionary attack designed to focus attention away from underground infiltration. Strike Force to command, we are go for tunnel insertion. Beginning planetary approach. The next 6 hours represented the culmination of everything humanity had learned about fighting impossible odds. While Zephyrian forces across the galaxy discovered that their dispersed fleets were facing coordinated attacks on hundreds of worlds simultaneously, Marcus Chen led a small team of volunteers through the rock and metal of the enemy homeworld toward a target that would either end the war or trigger the complete extinction of human civilization. The Imperial Command Center deep beneath Zephyr Prime's capital city had been built to coordinate the conquest and control of an entire galaxy. Its destruction would blind the Empire to developing situations across their territory, making coordinated response to the Galactic Rebellion impossible. Marcus emerged from the tunnel into a chamber filled with technology so advanced it seemed like magic. Holographic displays showed the status of Zephyrian forces across known space, and what those displays revealed made him understand the true scope of what humanity had accomplished. The Galactic Rebellion wasn't just succeeding, it was winning. Imperial forces were in retreat on dozens of worlds. Critical infrastructure was being systematically destroyed. Most importantly, subject species that had been passive for centuries were actively joining the fight for freedom. Rodriguez, start placing charges on the primary command nodes. We have maybe 10 minutes before their security forces locate us. As his team worked to plant explosives throughout the command center, Marcus activated his communicator to broadcast a message that would be heard across the galaxy. This is Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen of the Human Resistance, speaking to all free peoples of the galaxy. 2 years ago, they told us to kneel. They told us to surrender. They told us that resistance was impossible. The charges were in place, and Marcus's team was already moving toward their extraction point. But he continued speaking as they moved. Today, the impossible has happened. Imperial forces are in retreat across dozens of star systems. The prison worlds are being liberated. The communication networks that have controlled the galaxy for 10,000 years are falling silent. They reached the tunnel entrance as alarms began sounding throughout the Imperial complex. Behind them, the charges would detonate in less than 60 seconds, destroying the technological heart of Zephyrian civilization. The Age of Empire is ending, Marcus concluded as his team descended into the tunnel that would carry them back to their ships. The Age of Freedom has begun. The explosion that destroyed the Imperial Command Center sent shockwaves through Zephyrian space that were felt far beyond the physical damage. For the first time in recorded history, the Empire had been successfully attacked at its heart by the same species they had dismissed as primitive barbarians. 6 months later, Marcus Chen.